Thank you very much. Everything's working, right. Thank you very much for inviting me, first of all, and of course for coming here. It's a double honor for me to present this talk in Prague, because I'm both a functional linguist and a corpus linguist, and so this place is very special to me, as you can imagine. Right, so I'm going to talk about multilingual, parallel corpora, and linguistic theory. So parallel corpora have been used extensively, as you probably know, in applied linguistics. For example, in translation studies, in as training sets of machine translation systems, and in foreign language acquisition, research in bilingual lexicology, and so on. But what can they give to fundamental research? Actually, quite a lot. These are just a few examples of what we can do as linguists with parallel corpora. So we can identify areal patterns, as van der Auer and his colleagues did in their study of epistemic possibility in Slavic. Or we can investigate grammaticalization clients in different languages. For example, I try to investigate analytic causatives in Romance and Germanic, so-called Romance and Germanic sandwiches. So one can also try to identify the most important conceptual dimensions of variation cross-linguistically, and try to identify meaning clusters across languages. And an example is Weltley and Ciso's study based on 100 different languages, and they try to induce semantic dimensions of motion events, common semantic dimensions cross-linguistically. And of course, one can also try to infer structural properties of language ancestors, for example, Proto-Indo-European from synchronic data. An example is Verkerk's work on motion verb encoding in Indo-European. So, but there's been a lot of work with parallel corpora, but what is special about my talk? Actually, I want to propose an innovative approach here, and I already tried it in a couple of case studies that I'm also going to present here. So we can also use parallel corpora for cross-linguistic comparison of semantic and pragmatic constraints on formal variation in languages. So a parallel corpus contains verbalization of the same or similar situations, the same or similar conceptual contents in different languages. And this is a big advantage that we can use. So we can code these conceptual contents for different properties, or we'll call them variables, and use them as predictors of the formal choices made by translators. And these formal choices can be seen as an approximation of the choices that normal speakers make in verbalization of their own experience. And of course, this can be then later used as a source of inspiration for hypotheses that can be then tested on real language data. Authentic language data. Right, and so I want to show you how this can be done in two case studies. First one is about causative constructions in 10 genetically diverse languages. And I'm going to compare semantic constraints on the morphosyntactic variation of causatives. So, and the second case study is more about pragmatics. I'm interested in the TV distinction in 10 European languages, and I want to show how pragmatic constraints on the choice of personal pronouns and verbal forms can be modeled. So the data everywhere, I'll be using my own party corpus. It's a parallel corpus for typology, and that's kind of fun corpus because it contains online subtitles of films and TED Talks. I hope you've heard about them. If you haven't, I really recommend that you check. And there are translations in many languages simultaneously, right? And yeah, I mostly have Indo-European languages, but I also have a few others, like Chinese, Turkish, Finnish, Indonesian, Vietnamese, Thai, and some more. So the party corpus is partly available from my website, but I should make an effort of uploading more data there, but still some other projects and deadline are constantly coming up, unfortunately. So why subtitles, you might wonder? Probably everybody has this question. So that's strange kind of data. It just, because they are very close to informal conversations. And I think that informal conversations are basic in determining language structure and use. And so, but I wanted to also, that was my first impression, but I also wanted to test this, and I actually compared the frequencies of different n-grams in different kinds of subtitles in English, and also in well-established popular corpora such as COCA and the BNC and the Santa Barbara corpus of spoken American English. And so this is the cluster dendrogram that shows that how similar different components and genres like fiction, newspaper, conversations, broadcast, and also subtitles are to one another. And so what I found out that with regard to this quantitative data, actually this is the cluster of subtitles of different kinds, and in our original English and also translated from other languages, and they actually clustered together the closest with the American and British conversations. So, and the other way around, the conversations, they don't cluster together with the newspapers, fiction, and others, but they cluster together with subtitles. And the same situation is observed when we take other n-grams. So this is therefore evidence in support of my first impression that, of course, these are not spontaneous conversations, but they seem to imitate real spontaneous conversation pretty well, right? And so the method that I'm using also, I like to test different innovative statistical techniques. So this one is not really well spread so far, but it's getting more and more popular in corpus linguistics, I think. So the method is conditional inference trees. So this is the method I will use in order to help to find out which constraints, semantic and pragmatic ones, play a role in determining some formal variation in different languages. So this is a method based on binary recursive partitioning, and so which means that the algorithm is first in search of a covariate when you have different variables that can alternatively predict or determine some outcome. They're called covariates. So the algorithm first tries to find the covariate that the most strongly associated with the response, and the response would be there some TV forms or different types of causatives. And so here the criterion would be that it's one of the possibilities, for example, to have the smallest p-value. And then makes a binary split, then repeats the procedure again and again until certain conditions are met. For example, that's the p-value should be smaller than 0.05, the traditional level of significance, or the number of observations in the leaves you will see in a second. And so the p-values are produced, so for test of independence are derived by permutation algorithm, so it's very flexible. Then these methods also can deal with any data, continuous or categorical. That's also a very good characteristic. Then there are also advantages in comparison with other regression and classification trees. So if you're into statistics, you might have heard about the CART algorithm, for example, but the conditional inference trees approach is kind of better than the more traditional ones because it kind of corrects for the, there is no selection bias towards categorical predictors with many different levels where many different splits are possible. And so in this way it is preferable. And there is also no need to prune these trees and no danger of overfitting. So I've used the R package party, so again party, it's a party talk. And this is a very nice package in R, right? So what are the other advantages, or why do I want to use conditional inference trees and not traditional regression analysis? So first, of course, when you try to work with data in many different languages, most of which you don't know very, very well, to be honest. And it's extremely time-consuming. You have to ask informants, your colleagues, or people who know the languages especially, so what does this mean, or use dictionaries, reference grammar, so on. This is really time and labor consuming. So it's very difficult to get a high number of observations like we used in corpus linguistics for thousands and thousands of observations, right, to model an alternation. And so we have problem here, small n, large p, a small number of observation and large number of covariates of predictors. And so this can be problematic for normal regression analysis. Then there are also another problem that semantic and pragmatic variables, if you try to model this kind of variation, they're usually, in my experience, very highly intercorrelated, and then there is a risk of multicollinearity here and like meaningless results in a traditional regression. And they often participate in complex interactions, which is, you know, it's really difficult to model and to interpret. So there can be also many missing values, of course, in this kind of data, because there are so many different translation strategies that people can use that it's so much creativity there that sometimes you end up with very, very many missing values when you have a kind of a peripheristic translation or just something omitted for the sake of economy, timing, and so on. And so that's why conditional inference trees are actually a perfect solution in such situations, because they can actually deal with all these problems. And so I think that's really a good solution for this kind of data. Right, so let me start now with a case study, the first case study, causative constructions. So this is the traditional causative types, causative construction types in functional linguistics and typology. People speak about lexical, morphological, and analytical prephoristic causatives. Well, I will just use the label analytic for both analytic and in the strict sense of the word and prephoristic causatives. So it's not because it's the finer-grained properties are not important here. And so this is some examples. So a lexical causative is when there is a causing event and a caused event, and they are merged in one verb. So to kill or to break. So to kill means to cause to die, and more or less. And this is all merged, blended together in one word or a morpheme. Then there are morphological causatives where there is a causative affix. For example, like in Turkish, öldür, kill. So öl means to die, and dur is a causative affix that derives the causative form from the non-causal form. And in analytic causatives, like cause somebody to die, make somebody or something disappear, there are two verbs. The first verb expresses the causing event, like cause or make, and the second verb expresses the caused event, like to die or disappear, right? So that's all very simple so far. And also lexical causatives from a formal point of view are the most compact, and analytic causatives are the least compact. And most linguists believe, or have believed at least, that lexical causatives also express the most direct causation, and analytic causatives express the least direct causation from a semantic point of view. Right. So this is just an example from Heyman, who studied these constructions in terms of iconicity. So if you say something like, I raised the cup to my lips, that means that you were acting probably in a normal way, just exerting your own effort, putting your own effort, and acting upon this cup directly. But if you say, if you use an analytic causative, like I caused the cup to rise to my lips, this means that you're probably acting indirectly with kind of, I don't know, magic or telekinesis or something similar. Okay, so this causation is indirect then. Right. So in functional linguistics, there's been a traditional explanation of these differences, and there's form and function parallelism that which I would call iconicity of cohesion, following Haspelmath's formulation. So this principle is sounds as follows: meanings that belong together more closely semantically are expressed by more cohesive forms. Right. So if cause and effect are closely integrated semantically, then the elements that express them will be also formally integrated. So this is a traditional iconicity explanation. Right, but okay, that was popular in the 80s. But then came Dixon, and he started, he's a typologist, and he studied many, many languages, and he looked at more compact causative forms and less compact causative forms, and he found that actually there is just very many things going on cross-linguistically. So for example, if there is a language has a more compact and less compact causative form, then the more compact one will be formed usually from a non-causal verb describing a state, and the less compact would be formed from a non-causal verb describing an action. So this is one of the parameters. Other parameters are like transitivity of the base non-causal verb, whether the causee lacks or has control, whether the causee is willing or unwilling, partially or fully affected, whether the cause acts directly or indirectly, the cause achieves the result intentionally or accidentally, so causation occurring naturally or with effort. So this is really an interesting list. Okay, so let's try and see whether they actually, but this hasn't been tested quantitatively, at least as far as I know, and so maybe it just doesn't work. Then we don't have any problems. And but if it really like that, if this variation is indeed multivariate, then the iconicity approach has a problem, because there's just much more about this variation than iconicity theory can explain. So this could be explained, for example, that the cause acts directly or indirectly, but to say that intentional or accidental causation is also kind of direct or indirect, that means like making the notion of directness and indirectness so broad that it actually becomes vacuous. It doesn't mean anything anymore. It's not predictive. And so I took 10 languages, Chinese, Finnish, French, Hebrew, Indonesian, Japanese, Russian, Thai, Turkish, and Vietnamese. So most of them come from different families. French and Russian are an exception, but they are so typologically different that I hope that's not a problem. And so I took some subtitles from films: Avatar, Black Swan, Inception, Frozen, and Noah, very different ones. Yeah, diversity is the king here. And then a few TED Talks as well on different topics, from the psychology of your future self to do schools kill creativity. These are all very interesting talks. I really recommend that you hear and watch them. Right, so these were the data. And then I just took the English part and selected, I found 344 causative situations in my corpus in this data. And first I only looked at the English. So the English was the starting point always. So I coded these English contexts only for semantic and syntactic variables from Dixon, mostly based on Dixon parameters, but I had to adjust them, of course. Then, and then I also computed interrate agreement scores, which were okay. And when you do semantic research, it never does harm to compute interrate agreement scores. So, and after that, I found translations of these causative situations in these 10 languages, and I coded them for the type of the construction that was used: lexical, morphological, or analytic. Right? So this is just a long list of variables. Here I had to adjust them. So they're inspired by Dixon's list, but I had to adjust them because Dixon's variables don't work with all types of causatives. Unfortunately, he wasn't a corpus linguist, and he didn't think about how people could test actually his predictions. So I had to invent. I hope that's still in his spirit. So, for example, I didn't have any base verb in a lexical causative. So if you have a kill, what is the base verb? There is none, like morphologically speaking. Then, so I had to come up with some kind of caused event semantics, more semantic variables, for example, which can be non-action and action. Like if you say John killed Bill, the caused event is that Bill dies, right? And so this is not an action. So in Van Leeuwenhoek's classification, that would be a change of state. And he walked the baby upstairs, so the baby walks upstairs, that would be the caused event, and this is an action. So, and these are the expectation, more or less compact forms, like following Dixon's intuitions and observations. And so there were others, like number of main arguments. For example, John killed Bill. There are 2 main arguments. And John made Bill kill Mary. There are 3 main arguments. So the causee having control, making or letting, willing or unwilling causee. The causa acting directly, intentionally, forcefully, or involved in caused event or not. Okay. And I also added some other variables that were really easy to test: confidentiality, polarity, semantics of the causa, and semantics of the causee, just because they were really, really easy to code, and yeah, why not? So this is an example from the film Avatar. And so in the original, we have a sentence, don't shoot, you'll piss him off. So this is the cause situation. Somebody pisses somebody off, makes somebody angry. And so these are the translations, and there you can see the variation here already. So in French, we have a lexical causative, énervé, yeah, makes nervous. Then in Turkish, there is a morphological causative from the verb become angry. So it's morphologically derived. And in Vietnamese, there is an analytic causative with lam, which is kind of similar to make or do, and another, the second part. So this is an analytic causative, right? So this is just examples of the constructions that I observed in all these languages. So all languages have lexical causatives. All languages have analytic causatives as well, but only half of the languages have morphological causatives. So there's Finnish, Hebrew, Indonesian, Japanese, and Turkish, right? So these are also the proportions of the types of causative constructions in these 10 languages. So there's the blue bar, so this is Finnish, French, Hebrew, Indonesian, Japanese, Russian, Thai, Turkish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. So the blue bars represent the lexical causatives, and they are the most frequent everywhere, especially in Russian. So morphological causatives are shown as red bars here: Turkish, Japanese, Hebrew, and Finnish. So the largest proportion is in Turkish. And analytic causatives are these yellow bars. And yeah, they're not particularly frequent, and especially in Japanese, where there were only a few analytic causatives, so nothing really to speak about. Right. Okay, and now, as promised, I want to show you a conditional inference tree, and this is what the result of this algorithm looks like. So it is indeed a tree, a dendrogram. So, again, so this is a binary recursive partitioning algorithm. So the algorithm first looks at all covariates, all these semantic factors, and tries to find the one that is best associated with the outcome. And the outcome here is in Turkish, the choice between analytic and lexical causatives, right, for example. And so and it turns out that the variable that is the most strongly associated with this formal variation is making or letting. So if we have letting here, then there are no further splits are done, and we have a very high proportion of analytic causatives. Although, to be honest, one should also say that the number of these observations that are represented by this pin is not very big. It's only 12, okay? But still, we have an interesting tendency. And then the algorithm takes the other observations, the not letting, so all that represent proper causation, making causation, and so tries to do it again and finds another split at the given level of statistical significance, and this is the semantics of the causee. Okay, if the causee is inanimate, we have a very high proportion of lexical causatives to be used, right? But if it's animate, then there is a still a high proportion of lexical causatives, but the proportion of analytic causative is still a little bit higher. So this is how these conditional inference trees work. That's really easy to interpret, and I think a nice tool. So, and of course, it would be a waste of time to go through each tree. So I just put everything together here for you in this table. And so it just shows the features that favor analytic causatives as compared with lexical causatives. So these are the features, the following features: caused action versus caused state, 3 arguments versus 2, controlling causee, letting versus making, willing causee, animate causae, non-intentional causa, and inanimate causa. And so these are 9 languages. Well, Japanese was excluded because there was just too few analytic causatives there. So this is Finnish, French, Hebrew, Indonesian, Russian, Thai, Turkish, Vietnamese, and Chinese. So these dark green cells means that this variable, and this is letting versus making in all languages, appears at the top. So this is the most important variable everywhere. So letting versus making, this is really makes difference in all languages and uniformly. Right, and so like just simple green is means that this variable, this feature rather, this variable appears somewhere in the tree. You see that there's so much variation, and light green means that it just has a borderline significance. But you can see how much variation there is, and actually it shows that Dixon's multivariate, multifactorial approach really is confirmed by this data. So we observe first cross-linguistic variation and also multifactorial variation within each language also, right? So, now the features that boost morphological causatives, the chances of morphological causatives versus lexical against lexical causatives. So morphological causatives are preferred when we have letting versus making in Japanese. So non-intentional causes in Finnish, and borderline significance in Japanese and Turkish, and indirectly acting causa. Well, there's some preference in Finnish as well. And so as for Indonesian and Hebrew, there weren't any significant, any predictors that would be significantly associated with the outcome at this level of significance. Yeah, I have to dig more data, I guess. So, okay, these results are actually a problem for the iconicity based account, because it doesn't explain the multidimensional character of this variation. And I think a better explanation would be the principle of economy. So shorter constructions tend to refer to more frequent causative situations like lexical causatives, and longer ones to less frequent causative constructions, causative situations, sorry. And so this is also supported by corpus-based experimental and typological evidence that I'm collecting at the moment. So, killing somebody or breaking something is apparently more frequent than causing, I don't know, making something disappear or something like that. At least not maybe on the level of specific pairs, but at the level of constructional types. Okay, so maybe if you have any questions about this case study, maybe we can, I don't know, would you?
Well, I think if there are some technical questions, then
yes.
we may
yes.
just start now. But if there are more general questions, then we can have the question period after the end. So if there are some technical questions right now.
Well, perhaps,
yes.
Did you count the frequency of
the economy? Yes, thank you for this question. So I actually looked at so far only at one corpus, at Santa Barbara corpus of spoken American English, and I just try to find their causative situations, so any type. And then I analyzed them, coded them according to the same variables that I had in this data, and I found out that actually the features that are associated with more compact causatives cross-linguistically are also the more frequent ones in this corpus. But I'm also planning to try it on other languages and other corpora, definitely. But the first results show that this hypothesis is correct.
Okay. If there are more questions, please.
Okay. Thank you. So let us move to the second case study, TV forms in European languages. Now, some pragmatics. Okay, so the TV distinction in addressing the hearer is present in most European languages. And so the T forms are those forms that are informal and familiar, like French tu, German du, Russian ti, and they usually agree with the, always agree with the verb in the second person singular form, right? And there are V forms, so-called V forms, which are formal and polite, like French vous, German sie, Russian vi, and they agree with a verb in the second person plural or third person singular or plural, depending on the language. So this is the T and V forms that I'm going to talk about here. So there's been some cross-linguistic research on that, of course, and but mostly at the level of types. For example, this is a chapter from the World Atlas of Language Structures, and so it shows the distribution of different types of distinctions, politeness distinctions in the European languages. And so if the circle is white, like in English, Irish, and Albanian, this means that there is no politeness distinction. Like, you know, in English we always use you, yeah? Regardless of the situation. Then the yellow circles, which are the majority here, represent languages that have a binary politeness distinction, like Russian, French, German, I guess Czech as well. Right, good. And so there are also red dots here, Lithuanian, Hungarian, and Romanian, that represent multiple politeness distinctions, more than 2 politeness forms. Right. So, but the binary politeness distinction is the most common in Europe. Okay, and so, but of course, this is all interesting, but I was also wondering first, what are the cross-linguistic dissimilarities with regard to the frequencies, the relative frequencies of the forms, who are the more polite and distant, and who are behave in a way that all people are friends and family are one. So, and the second question is related to the topic of this talk, the cross-linguistic dissimilarities and the pragmatic and communicative constraints on this form in different communicative situations. Right. Of course, there's been a lot of research on politeness, and I cannot just make a comprehensive overview here. So I'll just refer as an example to a very influential paper by Brown and Gilman about power and solidarity in pronouns. And so they're talking about 2 dimensions of variation. So first, power dimension, and second, solidarity dimension. So power dimension kind of highlights the focuses on asymmetric relationship between people. So who is older, who is younger, who is richer, who is poorer, who is a parent, who is the child, right? And they show that there is a systematic TV distinction according to this dimension from the late Middle Ages. So when everybody had a fixed place in the society. But more recently, probably starting from the French Revolution, when there was now egalitarian ideology and more an increase in social mobility. So we're now having the solidarity dimension, which actually dominates in major European languages. And so solidarity means that we just see, are we similar? So do we have the same age? Do we belong to the same family, social class, and so on? And do we have the same political views? Do we look in the same way? Do we prefer the same kind of music? And there can be many different parameters of variation here. And so, but there are, of course, subtle cross-linguistic differences, as been shown in this and more recent research on this topic. Okay, so I took 10 languages, 3 Germanic languages, Dutch, German, and Swedish, 2 Romance languages, French and Spanish, 3 Slavic languages, Bulgarian, Polish, and Russian, so Czech is for future research. And I also took Greek and Finnish, non-Indo-European language, right? And so this is an overview of the TV forms and the standard varieties, because of course there's a lot of dialectal variation, and I only focus on standard varieties here. So these are the T pronouns, These are the V pronouns here, and there's also the verb agreement with the V pronoun. And everywhere I'll be talking, where I'm talking about these pronouns, I'm only talking about reference to single persons. So, okay. So these are the films, so there are more, from Inception to the Grand Budapest Hotel. So, because I wanted to have as many diverse communicative situations as possible. Right, and so I started again with the English data, and I picked up the uses of you and yourself when referring to one person only. So I had 243 communicative situations, and I only took the, because there is a lot of repetition and people keep talking together, I only took unique situations with unique participants in order to ensure maximal diversity. And so I found translations into the above mentioned 10 languages, and I code them for T or V, whether T or V form was used. And so there's been a lot of variables. So first one, so the most important group is the relationship between speaker and hearer, kind of dyadic variables. So for example, relative age. So is the speaker, the hearer younger, older, or of the same age than as the speaker? So of course I had to make approximate comparisons. Then does the hearer belong to a higher, lower, or the same social class as the speaker? Does the speaker have social power over the, does the hearer have social power over the speaker? For example, as an employer has over an employee, prime minister over a minister, the general over a soldier, and so on. So then the relative gender, so is it male speaking to male, male speaking to female, and so on. And also, importantly, the variable circle, where I try to kind of classify different kinds of social relationships. And this variable actually represents the solidarity dimension here. So do we have, so, and the groups that I came up with are the following. So family, romance, friends, people working together, people studying together at a school or university. I also had a category house, which it can be just people living together in one location, like in a hotel or in a household, like servants, for example. I also had many examples from where people lived in prison, and so I didn't have an clear idea what which other category to relate it to. So and also, of course, acquaintances and strangers. So kind of family would be the most intimate, probably the highest intimacy situation, and strangers would be the lowest intimacy situation, right? Okay, and so I also look at the age and social class and gender of the speaker and hearer separately, because that might also have an influence. And variables describing communicative setting. For example, are there any other people involved in the communication? Does the interaction take place in an office or in a government building? So it's something official or something private, or maybe in the street. So, and also variable, does the action take place before 1968? So this was actually, it's a very important year, of course, in European history, and the 60s were, of course, a period of major social changes, and when the societies, at least in the West, became more democratic, and so this influenced communication greatly. And for example, in Sweden, there was even a debate, public debate, about what kind of politeness pronouns people should use, and they decided that they will use the T form to everybody in this spirit of egalitarianism. And now IKEA has problems translating these the T forms in Swedish and their catalogs into other languages, because not all people might really appreciate this being addressed by the T form. Although they, at the same time, they want to promote their idea of egalitarianism, that all people are equal and so on. So this is a corporate policy as well, and this is a difficult, sometimes difficult choices have to be made. And so, the final variable is whether the action takes place in Great Britain, and the reason was maybe the British might be perceived as more formal than Americans, for example. Right. Okay, so this is just an example from the Grand Budapest Hotel if you remember the interaction between Monsieur Gustave, the concierge, and Madame D, a very rich elderly woman. And so he says, "What have you done to your fingernails?" Madame D, "I beg your pardon." Monsieur Gustave, "This diabolical varnish. The color is completely wrong." Madame D, "Don't you like it?" Monsieur Gustave, "It's not that I don't like it. I'm physically repulsed." So let's have a look, focus only on Madame D's perspective. So she's talking to Monsieur Gustave, and so this is some how I coded this communicative situation. So the relative age, so the hero is Monsieur Gustave, and he's younger. And he also belongs to a lower social class because he's just a simple concierge. Though he has less power. Also, so this is female spoken to a male, and their relationship is they're in a romantic relationship, actually. And so the individual variable. So the speaker is elderly, upper class, and female, and the hearer is middle-aged, lower class, and male. And so there are no others present and involved in this communication, at least. So it doesn't take place in an office. It takes place before the 60s, yes, and it doesn't take place in Britain, but if you remember, it takes place in an imaginary country called Zubrovka, right, that no longer exists. Okay, and now, this was the part about the variables, the pragmatic and communicative variables, and now I also had to code the translations into T and V forms. So in English we had, I had sentence, for example, this is from Inception. "Mole, what are you doing here?" So this is Leonardo DiCaprio's character addressing his wife, like in a dream, though she was long dead. So in German we have "Mol, was tust du hier?" There's a T pronoun, du, and a T verb form, tust. Then in Russian the same, we have a T pronoun, ty, and a T verb form, делаешь. But in some languages, like in Spanish and Bulgarian, we have a pro drop. So we don't have a pronoun, as you know. And so we only have a verb form. And so in these cases, I had to rely on the verb form only, okay? But they were all coded as T variant. So these are the proportions in different shades of blue. Hope you can see it. So of T and V forms in 10 languages, so Bulgarian, Dutch, Finnish, French, German, Greek, Polish, Russian, Spanish, and Swedish. So the dark blue, very dark blue bars represent the T forms, okay? And the lighter blue bars represent the V forms. So the proportion of V forms is the greatest in French, then followed by German and Russian. And it's lowest, so the V form is relatively the least frequent in Swedish, followed by Greek probably. So there are also sometimes other pronouns used in German, like the archaic form ihr, but that's not important. And also interestingly, sometimes no pronominal form is used, no personal form is used, and people use avoidance strategies. And very interestingly, in Finnish, there's a kind of subtle difference here, but it has the largest proportion of avoidances. And actually, this supports previous research about Finnish. They say that Finnish has a lot of different strategies when people don't want to really make choice between T and V. And so they prefer to use something like something else, and but not to be forced into making this decision, which can be very face-threatening, of course. Right, and so this is now a conditional inference tree from an example from Dutch. Interestingly, we have here the most important variable that is the most strongly associated with the outcome, the use of T or V forms, and in Dutch it's U, the V form, and je or je, the T form. Okay, so this is the relative class, so social class. So if the social class of the speaker is higher than that of the hearer, higher than that of the speaker, then we have a higher proportion of U, means the V form. Okay, this is kind of makes sense, right? So with the other data, when we have other kind of social class relationships. So the next split is made here in circle, the circle variable. That's a solidarity variable. That's and the split is made between family, friends, romance, and work colleagues. So who predominantly use ye. These are this is the T form, and the others. So low intimacy contexts where we still have predominantly ye, but we also have a higher proportion of u, right? And so when I looked at all trees, I made the following conclusion. So the most important variable everywhere is circle. This is solidarity variable, as predicted by Brown and Gilman. So it occurs in all languages, it appears in all trees, except for Swedish, interestingly. And so in all countries, strangers and acquaintances are addressed more frequently by V, and family friends as T. Well, surprise, surprise, right? So there is interesting variation going there, and unfortunately I can't go into details here, but as for other levels of these intimacy circles of trust are concerned, there's a really big variation. For example, in French and German, the T forms are only restricted to friends and family. And in Finnish, Greek, and Polish, they are the least restricted. Everybody is a friend, so to say, right? Or, I don't know. That's, and also, the second most important variable is relative social class. This is kind of more power, the variable related to the power dimension, so in some languages. And usually when the hearer is high on the social ladder than the speaker, he or she is addressed by the V form. But this variable is sometimes conditional on time. Like in Swedish, this variable only appears in the contexts that are kind of meant to happen in situations that are kind of believed to be happening in before the 60s. So, and this is exactly what one could predict because after the 60s, this change, this revolution in the terms of address happened, right? And this is no longer important. And also some other nuances, which I'll skip. And also, as for other variables, there's a lot of variation. For example, the variable office kind of invites more V forms in German. Yes, that's very typically German, probably. So, as for age sometimes plays a role in Polish, Bulgarian, and French. And so, but gender, well, that's very interesting. Men speaking to men in low intimacy situations prefer V forms in Finnish. They probably see it as very face-threatening, prefer to be on the safe side. That's interesting. It's something that would be interesting to look at in more detail. Okay, and so also Britain plays a role, whether the action takes place in Great Britain or not. So some contexts, it's important in Bulgarian, Greek, Polish, and Spanish, people perceive, obviously, British speakers as more formal than others, right? But interestingly, all these kind of modulations, they relate to low intimacy situations. So when we have high intimacy situations between friends and family, there's just everything looks easy and simple. But when we deal with strangers and acquaintances, they may not be sure which are really a form to choose, and this is also a more face-threatening situation with high embarrassment potential. Right, so these are the conclusions. So the solidarity dimension is indeed the most universal and powerful, but there is a lot of variation regarding to the boundary between high and low intimacy situations. Then the power dimension is still present, however, it's not gone yet. And there are more constraints and cross-linguistic variation in low intimacy context, as I said. So it's probably related to high embarrassment potential in using Kretzenbacher's words. Okay, and so these are my very general conclusions. I hope I've managed to show you that analysis of semantic and pragmatic constraints on formal variation based on parallel corpora can help answer fundamental questions about language in general or different languages and make interesting discoveries. And I also believe that conditional inference trees are indispensable, very useful tool for modeling formal variation based on many interrelated variables in relatively small data sets. So thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much for the for your talk. I think that
The microphone.
In conclusion, actually, what you said is that you stress the importance of comparative studies. I think this is something which, especially in praglinguistics, is has been stressed and emphasized by by linguists belonging to that to the circle. So, please, questions, remarks, observations, objections. So may I have one question? Sylvia, were you satisfied with the answer to your question after the first part of the talk? Okay, okay. Yeah.
Thank you very much for the talk. I really find your results very interesting. And could I ask you, do you suppose that your results that you get after your statistical analysis or digital analysis, do you believe them? They are stronger than the results of typologists made before. So your maybe it's a silly question, but you really have very strong results, and they say a lot about situation and many. They give many facts and give evidence for many features. So.
Yes. Okay. Yes, I think, well, I believe in my results, obviously, and also they're corroborated actually by corpus evidence that I mentioned already, and also by experimental evidence. I, for example, recently conducted an artificial language learning experiment, and I saw that actually in an artificial alien language, after when speakers of different languages, I had Czech speakers, Russian speakers, German speakers, and so on, but they all show similar preference for shorter forms that designate when they talk about more frequent situations, and longer forms when they have to express some less frequent situation. So I manipulated frequencies of different kind of causative situations, and I found that result that really people are behaving in an economical way. So it was really a nice result. And so there's also typological evidence. I also can beat some typologists, at least on their own field, because I also looked at about 100 languages from all over the world, and I only looked at typological descriptions in reference grammars. And I found out that actually, so this is not the cohesion, like the type of causative that is kind of would be predicted by iconicity theory, is kind of more associated with the directness and indirectness of causation, but it just length of construction, like regardless of cohesion. So that's also supports my belief in this. And also there is also some tradition in pragmatics, especially neo-Gracian pragmatics, where they actually argue in the same vein that it's unexpectedness or expectedness, surprisal, and predictability and frequency of different situations that actually forces people to use more or less marked formulae expressions with more or less overt marking and length and so on. So I think there's something different kinds of evidence and theories kind of converge there.
Martin?
Can I have a question concerning
Maria.
I'd just like to ask a question concerning the data. There are some people would perhaps say that relying on the translations of the subtitles may be a bit problematic because there are special kind of language speaking about the constraint of space and time. Does this seem to cause problems? Are the subtitle translations influenced by translationese or subtitle translationese, or did you observe any effects of that?
On some level it probably should, but I treat it as a kind of empirical question, which is sometimes difficult to answer, but I try to answer it because for some constructions it may play a role, and maybe, for example, if you look at tag question translations, English tag question and their translation in some language where they don't have this construction, but they will try to render it, and let's make it there's funny translationese effects, and so this is won't be a good idea to count these constructions then in this target language because this is not this language does normally, I think this quantitative analysis that I showed just one cluster analysis, and based on n-grams, I think at least quantitatively, and there are no big difference. I only try to compare the frequencies of these n-grams and look at them, what kind of n-grams, and I still see no identifiable patterns really there. But of course there's a lot of research on film language, which is of course very different from spontaneous conversations. Well, some people say that's very different, some people say no, we still can use it as a proxy. But for example, in film language, characters don't speak about past events because everything should be shown in a film, and then usually it's not good film where people have to explain what happened, right? And so this is not what they do. And and also in film language, there are maybe too many different politeness formula and terms of address because people communicate very fast with different people. It should be all dynamic, and they meet different people, and they meet, how do you do, and what is your name, and so on. So it's all also we don't do that often in spontaneous conversations. But still, I think with regard to causatives, I think still, and if there are some restrictions on the length, they're the same in all languages, I think. So that's. I get it. Yes, I'm very optimistic, yes.
Yeah, thank you. I liked your talk a lot too. You had a slide where you showed the conversation, the sentences tagged for the pronoun and the verb form for T and V. Yes. So I wonder if you also had cases where it's somehow halfway between polite and impolite forms. In Czech, it could be if you address somebody by the first name, but still you use the V form, or maybe in Polish when you use pan, but you use the singular second person. And so so if you had such cases, so this is a kind of something about the data, and about the causatives. It struck me that maybe there is something similar when you categorize forms in Japanese, where actually it could be seen as morphology, but actually the conjugatable suffixes. They can be seen as, from another perspective, as individual auxiliaries. So,
yeah, of course, it's much more nuanced than than what I show here. This is, I must admit, I have to, in order to have some statistically significant results, to be able to make this statistical inference, I have to, have kind of rough categories. I didn't take into account the different address forms, although I'm very well aware there's a lot of interesting literature that shows how important these are. It would be nice maybe at some point, although these are less frequent, of course, than these just standard ways. That's definitely, there would be, I think, problems with data sparseness there. But if I have a large data set, then would be also an interesting topic to investigate, definitely. With causatives, yes, I'm just using standard classification literature. Yes, it's actually the causative continuum is it's a continuum, and so these are just some focal points, some prototypes, but there can be intermediary cases and much more going on. Always, yes. So I have to, make difficult decisions.
My question goes back to data that was asked before. Specifically, I have to admit I don't understand why you used the parallel corpus for the TV distinction, because I think it makes things much harder, and especially when it goes to statistical significance, because I think there are many more factors if you include translations, and I don't understand why you include translations into the whole situation, because it seems that there are many language of the original discourse is very much linked to the whole society and how things work. So when translating, for instance, from Swedish into Czech, you very often have situations where people are using last names, and you have a choice to make. Do you make it more formal by switching the pronouns, or do you completely change the translation by using first names? Because if you stay with the T form and last names, it changes the whole tone of the situation into something you probably don't want, because it wasn't that case in Swedish, like being very rude, for instance, in some situations. So I think that this makes things very hard for me, because you have to account for the original language from which you are translating, and that seems hard to do given the amount of data and so on. So why not using, for instance, comparable corpora, where you would be certain you are using the language is linked to the underlying situation in that native to that language, basically.
Yeah, because I want to compare them. And how would you compare if you have comparable corpus? Then you need some comparative concepts, some tertia comparationes. And then how it would be very difficult to find comparable situations where the same number of parameters are kept equal, right? So this is, I totally agree with you that there are very many fine-grained, very interesting things going on. But I think this is something for qualitative analysis, and I think that quantitative analysis and qualitative should complement each other. So I hope that they would, and so. But of course, I want to have a kind of a bird eye view, but of course one can zoom in and look at these contextual modulations. Of course, there is so much more going on. The people can use these TV forms in ironic contexts as sarcasm and play them. And there's so much negotiation going on. So that's. But I think there's some complementary things. So you could use these, my results, for example, for a qualitative study and look at the corpus of comparable corpus, and then try to look at the context in a more detailed way. So I don't think there is a necessary conflict. I think people should collaborate.
Maybe there's something I don't understand, so I will not protest more.
Okay.
Well, may I have one remark? I think I understand both sides. In a way, it's very difficult to say what's a comparable. What is a comparable corpus? I mean, what is it? What is comparable feature? On the other hand, I think that it's very important to take in the analysis to take into account from which language you translate to another language, because the features of the original language may somehow influence the translation. Either you use the same form, even unconsciously, as a translator, or you try to have some mimicry. Just to use some other forms, which probably in a talk you would not use if you were not translating. So I think truth is on both sides. I have one question concerning the causative case you spoke about. Actually, you had on the one side you had causative situation, and the other side you looked at the forms by which the situation is being referred to. And I would like to know what were the features of the situation when you wanted to characterize the situation as a causative one, because it seemed to me that sometimes it's very much related to the linguistic forms. What I would call causative situation. So.
Yes, you're right. So I use the English causatives as the input, so they're well described. So there's many different constructions. Of course, ideally, it would be nice to also look at try other languages as an input. For example, Russian, where might be interesting differences there, right? But you're right. This is a problematic point. Yes, ideally, we should try to use different input languages.
Two meta questions. First, how large is the project? How much time did you spend to do all of this? Are you alone, or is it a group of researchers? And the second question is, what are your future plans for case studies?
Oh, great questions. Thank you very much. So yeah, I did it as a main part of my postdoctoral project funded by the Belgian Research Foundation in Wallonia, and during my research stay in Leuven-la-Neuve, and it took me about 2 years, maybe and a half, to do this. I worked on my own, but I used many specialists in different languages who could help me to decipher what's going on. But now I think I've kind of managed to find my way with different languages. And what was the future plans? Oh, they were really, at the moment I'm more interested in iconicity and economy effects, so more general principles, but I don't know, there are many opportunities. So if you have any research suggestions, interested in collaboration, please contact me. Interesting variation, and it would be really interesting. I also wanted to include more languages in this TV study, like would like to take Czech, maybe Italian, where there's three-way, usually actually in actual usage distinction, and some other languages as well. Oh.
It's really a small question to the TV study. Why wasn't absolute age of the addressee included as a factor? Because it seems to be a really very clear factor. Whenever somebody is, I don't know, less than 15, you simply do not use V form to address that person. Is it because that makes no difference and it's the same in all languages that use V form, or?
No, actually it was taken into account. Yeah, it just I had to go very quickly.
Okay,
I thought
okay.
you were already very tired, so and it was taken into account. But it didn't appear in, I think, only in one language. Hope it's working. Yeah, they hear age. It's actually important in French in low intimacy situations. So yeah, you have younger hearers, children and teenagers and people probably under 30. So that was my cutting point. They address more frequently by T forms. Yeah, but not really much evidence in the other cases.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah. So maybe it's just covered by circle. Just maybe you use T forms in the family, or.
Do you have situations in, say, Russian where you can address people who are, let's say, 10 with V form?
No, I can't think.
I would guess that's in most languages. That's why I'm surprised why it's not a significant factor.
Yes,
because
that's
at least the
interesting.
languages that I know with V form, there are not too many, but at least 4 or 5, cannot use it for children. I mean, uniformly they cannot, except
Yeah.
maybe royalty.
Yeah, well, there actually were royalties in Frozen, so that's probably due to them. Princess Anna and Princess Elsa, yes, that's because of them, I guess. Yeah.
Neither do I, but I think it's now time to thank once more to Professor Levshila for her talk. I would like to thank you to those who who participated in the discussion. I think there will be some intimate follow-up discussions in Tu and Wu, and maybe I think we know the contact to you, so maybe we can put some questions related to your talk afterwards. So thank you once more for your talk. Thank you for your participation, and have a nice time in Prague if you still have some time in Prague.